And say an official good morning and thank you to all of you for joining us, as well as to my lovely panel. I'm going to introduce them as we roll along today, but we are in a session called Wedded to Weeding, and I should have made a cute slide like involving an altar and a couple of people or a cake or something fun, but quite frankly, I did not have time for graphic design. Nor do I have anything remotely resembling graphic design skills. So you are all probably pretty lucky that I did not actually attempt such a thing. But the way we're going to structure our time together this morning is I've asked each panelist, and we have four panelists from all around the state and in different size libraries, to take about 5, 7, 8 minutes here to sort of talk about their projects and what they've done um, as far as weeding goes. So they're going to give sort of an overview of their approach, their process, their projects, and then we'll invite all of you guys to ask questions. And so, panel, I'll be monitoring that chat as we go through here, and I'll sort of collect questions. You guys know me at this point. Some of you do, and I always have a question in my back pocket. So if you guys take a minute to come up with questions, we do have a few softballs to throw the panel before we get started here as well. So we're just going in alphabetical order by last name, except for Miss Marie. We have mostly beginning of the alphabet people. So I can't imagine it's too often that Kendra Evers is, second from the end with regards to alphabet. But Wendy is going to start us, and then Jerry, and we'll move down the line from there. So Wendy, why don't you go ahead and kick us off here? Tell us a little bit about your weeding project.
Well, about 3 years ago, I became director here, and our previous director hated weeding, hated doing it, which is fine. It's not everybody's favorite thing. But when I first started here 18 years ago, I was instructed to weed anything that was 5 to 7 years old that hadn't circulated in 5 to 7 years. So, not a whole lot of weeding going on from year to year at that point. Fast forward, I don't know, 10 years or so, and me and my director went to a weeding uh, seminar. And they said, normal weeding 3 to 4 years. And I was so excited because I felt like I then had permission to just go through everything and just weed. So that's what I did. I was in the youth library at the time, and I did a massive weed back then. Fast forward again to 3 years ago when I became director, and I knew my director didn't like to weed. I even offered to come down and weed the adult library, except that I didn't know her collection, so it wouldn't have worked out very well. So I settled in for a few months, and then I just tackled it. I went crazy. I started in the nonfiction, and I weeded over half of it just within a couple weeks. Um, Very outdated, old, not relevant, just ratty looking things. I pulled it. Um, I pulled some to replace, but most of it just pretty much ended up in the dumpster. Then I moved on to the fiction section, and I did all genres of the fiction section, and did that. And then I moved on to the miscellaneous items, the audios, movies, puzzles, cake pans, anything in that area. By the time I was said and done between September and December in 2020, I had weeded just shy of 1,000 items just on the adult side of our library, just because it hadn't really, it'd been done, but not enough. Um, and I was able to move things around. I had shelf space. Patrons were so happy that they could actually look through the shelves and not be overwhelmed by the amount that was in there. So that was gratifying. Although I did have a couple that came in and said it looks emptier. Where are all the books? What are you doing? How could you take them out? And you have to very nicely explain, the library can't hold everything. We're not that big. We're not, the Library of Congress or anything like that. Um, so that was gratifying. I felt so good when I was finished with that. Um, for me, I like to get into the stacks. I don't run a report off of our atrium. I get into the stacks and we still have stamps in our books. So I pull one book at a time and I look at I take into account three things. I look at the circ time, how long since it last circulated. I look at the number of circs, how many times it's gone out, and the span between circs. Is it, a few days? Is it a few months? Is it a few years? And I take all that into account because sometimes there's a book or a series of books that after 3 years, it seems to what do you want to say, circulate back around and it starts going out again. So that helps me decide whether it needs to be pulled or not pulled. But basically anything 3 to 4 years, I just pull and I'm done because I have that permission now and it feels so good. Um, Plus, getting in the stacks like that, pulling each book, it helps me know my collection. It helps me remember what I have, what's there. So when people ask me if I have something, 9 times out of 10, I can tell them by memory if it's in or not, which is really nice. Um, I don't have a schedule for it. It's when the urge hits, I just start. And then once I start, I can't stop. I just tend to go through the whole thing. I need to get a schedule because I think that would be much more time efficient. Because otherwise, I'm blocking myself off for hours at a time just in the stacks. I also tend to move things around when I weed. I'll move one section here, a section there. I'll even move shelves around, which the patrons have a love-hate relationship with. They love it when I do that, but they hate it also because then they always say, I have to search, I have to look, I don't know where things are at. I said, that's the point. You don't know where things are at. Go look. Maybe you'll find something you didn't know you wanted to check out. And a lot of times they do, which works out great. So that's basically my story. I wasn't timing myself or anything, but
I also lost track of time. I started
oh,
flipping through the
sorry.
chat to make sure we have people named right. No, that's, I think, a great story and not atypical, right? I think we might hear this from other people. You inherit a mess, and sometimes it's easier to weed somebody else's mess than your own. But I've weeded my own mess too. So props to you. We did have a question about your library size. So Woodbine is a size C. What's your
Yep.
population about in your town?
I think it's a 1600 in
Mhm.
that range. It's 16 something. I don't know the exact, which has
Great.
actually gone up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you know how I gave that little speech about alphabetical order at the beginning and then promptly forgot the alphabet? It's, library school problems here. So we're not quite going in alphabetical order. Jerry, you should have yelled at me. But we'll flip over to Jerry now to hear your wedded to weeding story.
Yeah, good morning. I'm from the Ventura Public Library. We're a size B library population of like 703 or 11, very small library. I love to weed. I've completed 4 major library weeds in different libraries, and finally I'm starting on my own library that I've been director of for just 2 years. But the one I want to talk about is the weed I just completed in another community near us. I don't know if I should say their name, so I won't. Um, they had very limited hours during COVID, and then their director retired. And their library ended up being completely shut down for about a year and a half. And at that point, they decided as a board that they should paint and carpet and maybe do some updating before they reopened. So I came in and I weeded their entire collection for them. I got rid of, I wrote the numbers down, a little over 30% of their collection, um, which was almost 4,000 books, which they had way too many books for the size of their library. But I think a trap a lot of small libraries fall into is donations. I don't know if others have this. They had the largest selection of 200s that I've ever seen in my life. I probably weeded 400 books just from the 200s. You just have to learn to say no. Really appreciate it. We'd be glad to put them on our sale table, but they don't fit with the needs of a public library. Those were what's the biggest thing. The other thing is just making sure your board understands why you weed and the benefits from weeding. They don't always understand the process, and they're looking at the tax dollars being thrown away. And we all know that isn't what it is. If we kept every book, we wouldn't have space to put any new books in there. I got some really great advice from Jay when I started out as director. And he's like, we're always afraid that we're going to throw away something that's got some value. Very few library books have value because we like to put our name on there. We stamp them 3 or 4 times with our name, and then we put labels on them, and then we got a spine label and a barcode label, and then we put date stamps in them. They aren't valuable. And if they're replaceable, just let them go. If somebody wants to read whatever it is, you can either interlibrary loan it from a library that doesn't like to weed, or worst case, you can find it on a used book site. Less is more. If you can't see, you can't see the forest for the trees.
That's pretty amazing that library decided to do that. I think I don't hear that story very often, that like, oh wow, this would be a good time to get rid of 30% of our collection.
Yeah, I don't think they realized I was going to be that aggressive, but I didn't. I probably could have taken out another 15%, but you're afraid of empty shelves.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one thing to get rid of the books. You do want, I mean, sometimes less is more, obviously, and I think we'll hear that story as we go through today, but an entire empty bay of shelves is not super great. Yeah, and a lot of people in chat resonating with the donation comment. Christy says 95% of what gets donated to our library goes immediately to the Friends group. I think that would be an interesting stat to gather for those donations. And it's still benefiting the library, right? Well, theoretically, your Friends group is supporting the library. Not all friends are friendly, as we sometimes say, but it's still a great way for a library user to support their library through the donation to the Friends group for sure. Okay, Kendra, let's flip over to you, and I have your slides here. Okay, you should be seeing my screen, I think. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So
Beautiful.
what are we looking at here?
Oh boy. I've worked at the Clinton Public Library for 15 years, started as a page. So I've been a part of a lot of weeding projects actually. A previous director, I believe around 2012, we did like a major hack of like all of our collections in our adult services. But I became the youth services librarian February 2020, right before COVID lockdown. So the children's floor had been set up like this since I was a kid. Um, just very packed, and it was split. We have 3 rooms for our children's department. The middle room is our like circulation hub with our circulation desk, and then we had 1 room dedicated to fiction and 1 room dedicated to nonfiction. So this slide is the fiction room. As you can see, it is packed. Like all those picture books, like a little kid can't even reach that 4th shelf. They were just packed in there. Um, and we noticed that our nonfiction wasn't really getting circulated because people thought of that as not the fun room. So we we decided when lockdown hit, we had already been discussing as a team, like, hey, like I'm new in this role, but I've been at the library. I was the teen services coordinator before this. Like, I know that we're like sick of this. Like, what do we want to do? So we sat and talked, like, what kind of changes can we do? And we knew, like, eventually, like, this would have to be weeded before we could do any moves. If you want to go to the next slide, to show the nonfiction room.
Oh, is
Um,
it this one?
yes.
Okay.
So again, packed shelves, tall, like great floor space. We had done a pretty big weed again, like around 2012, 2013, where we had stacks in the room that took up a lot of the room space too. So we had significantly brought our numbers down, but still, it just, those are really packed shelves. Um,
Are
so,
you guys the way this building is set up makes me think you guys must be an old Carnegie space.
oh, you
Kids
guessed right.
kids room downstairs, multiple tiny rooms.
Yep. So we're actually the setup currently for the children's department is on the second floor, which is kind of funny because we are working on moving and weeding again to go into the lower level, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, so I mean these rooms served us well since the late 60s. So but to get started on this, what I didn't even know where to start because some of these books were old. Like some of these books I read as a kid. So I did use our Simply reports through Polaris ILS to generate reports. I just made a huge list of books that hadn't been checked out since 2017, just to kind of give that 3 year um, kind of using the crew method, but just somewhere to start. But I wanted all of the information so I could then filter in Excel because I like using Excel more than the report system. So I could basically generate my own reports. So I would filter it by last checked out, how many circs did it actually have? When did we first make it available? Like I was able to kind of filter through all of that. And I looked at our picture books, our leveled readers, our nonfiction. I wanted to know all of it. And we had time because we were in lockdown and we didn't have people coming into the library. So there was a lot of pre-planning how we were going to go about pulling these books, but I wasn't too worried about the patrons weren't seeing this work happening in real time, so they weren't seeing the carts of books leaving the floor. Um, but yeah, so I used the crew method. I really relied heavily on that. Also just talking with staff, like using that as well. We're going by this method, and this is what they recommend. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slides, so after the big weed, and then also a room switch. So all of that nonfiction ended up on these lower shelves right here. And then along the wall is the Juve chapter books. And our Juve chapter books didn't get too badly weeded. It was mostly the nonfiction and picture books. And then the next slide should show. So we weeded the picture books a lot, and um, we got the browsing bin shelves. So that was new to our library. So we were also doing a weed to make that fit as well. And the issue of it being 4 shelves high, we were still worried about that. So even just more recently, we did another weed to have it go from 4 shelves to 3 shelves. So it's been a long process. But the initial weed probably took the summer of 2020 to get done. So,
Yeah.
um,
I think COVID comes into several of
mhm,
these stories, right? Where it's like,
yeah.
wow, we had no one in the library and we hated it, but also, we were able to get this done. That's great. I love the use of the top shelf for face out stuff
Mhm,
too. I think that's a great way
yep.
to promote titles that you'd like to see go out. Great way, easy way for parents at least to grab stuff. And the face out bins are great too. Do they pull out like drawers then that you can get the books in?
No, they do not. We just have them spaced height wise.
Yeah.
They probably need another slight weed because it is kind of getting harder to browse through them.
Mm.
I have a love-hate relationship with these. It works for some libraries, it doesn't work for others. I'm on the fence, but our patrons like them. So
Yes, I hear that a lot when I visit libraries. The patrons love them, the librarians tolerate them, but the face out bins they're so browsable for the patrons and they're so hard to shelve in for the
yeah.
librarians, right?
Uh,
Someone comments, I like that you changed the seating in the nonfiction area to something softer and more enjoyable. So studious before for
yeah.
yes, those 7-year-olds are going to come do their homework in the nonfiction section of the library. Well, that's very fun. Here's another picture of
Yep.
that same room from the other side.
And of course, that's where we have story time. So we have plenty of room for kids to sit on the floor ready for story time. So,
Very cool.
yep.
Very cool. And then this is you too?
Oh, yeah. And then we had another project where we ended up putting our teens collection up there. So we did have to do another small weed for our Juve chapter books so we could fit our teen books up
Mhm.
there in the same space. But that's what it looks like now.
Yeah,
So,
that's very cool. And the audiobook's right there too. And
yep.
is that a magnetic Scrabble board?
It is.
I love that. That is really cute. Cool.
Yep.
And there's another angle of that same space
Yep. So, and then I unfortunately didn't get percentages, but we did weed 605 nonfiction titles
from
um,
the
from
youth.
the, yeah, from the youth nonfiction, and 289 picture books, 394 Juve chapter books.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and
Those
that
juvenile
was,
chapter books are ones that are hard though, right? Because they
mhm,
kind of take up a lot of
yeah,
space and they don't really get read more than once by folks, or like one patron wouldn't necessarily check it
mhm,
out more than once. So
right.
once your frequent flyers get through them, then they kind of tend to sit there, right?
Yeah, and that's why I love uh, the crew method because yeah, they don't. It's 2 years for Juve materials according to that. So
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm going to stop my share and Marie, I'll pull up your pictures whenever you're ready for them. You tell me when.
Okay. Um, Baxter is a city school combined library. And so all of our books in the library are marked as to who owns them. So the first 10 years I worked with a school librarian who believed that all books had a place and someone may want to read them someday. And so during this time, I was only allowed to read books owned by the city. I was able to meet the accreditation quota, but often I was getting rid of our books that were much better than their books, leaving theirs on the shelf. In 2018, Marcia finally retired, and we hired a new school librarian who was still taking classes at UNI. In his classes, they talked about how better looking books and less crowded shelves led to increased checkouts. Thank you, UNI. I love this guy. He had 10 years. I had 10 years experience in library land, and he told me to just go for it because I would know more what to do than him. So it was really nice to have someone with confidence in me and allow us to do this. During this time, we got rid of a book that was checked out. The last time was in 1965. And this is in 2018. I got rid of books that said man may someday land on the moon. I had a secretarial book with a chapter on how to make coffee in a percolator, a whole chapter. It was a lot of work, but the decisions were very easy to make. We started by getting rid of all the obvious books. And after that, we went to the computer and printed a list of those not checked out for 5 years. I go by 3 now, but you can only do so much at a time. In the end, we got rid of 2,195 books out of 20,000. So it was about 12% of our collection. We did that in 3 months. We had books piled up 3 foot high in about a 10 by 10 area. Patrons were a little bit upset. I told them, go pick what you want out of the piles and put a donation in the jar, but most couldn't even find anything to take. So that kind of calmed them down a little. So now I'm on a weeding schedule, and every section is weeded about every 4 years. The schedule, I alter it if we have a section that we are having problems putting books away. So during a normal weed, I print a list of all the books in that section that have not been checked out for 3 years. And then I go through the books and I tilt each one on its side, which is one of my pictures. I've got the books are tilted down, and I do the entire section and tilt all the books down. And then I go back. Yeah, I tilt them. Everything that hasn't been checked out is tilted down. And then I highlight all the books that I found on my list of checkouts, non-checkouts. And then I go back after I get all that done and decide what to get rid of. Um, I go by condition. I go by if the book was ever popular. Some of them have never been popular. Um, I also go by if that author is popular. I'll often keep some books that haven't checked out as long as they're in good condition, if they're from an author that's pretty popular. The biggest problem I have reading is a series. It's difficult for me because sometimes that series is still, the newer books are all checking out, and then you'll get a new reader who wants to read all of them. So they're the hardest for me to get rid of. I often will put them up in a display towards the entrance to see if I can get some interest. And if not, then I usually get rid of the entire series if there's not much interest in it. I don't like having just part of a series. That's just my personal problem there. After this, I go back later and put all, one of the things that's fun is people will come in and want to know why the books are tilted. And I tell them that's their chance to save a book. If they check it out, they can save that book. And so that's always kind of fun. But so then about 3 months later, I go back after I've gotten rid of the books and I kind of use it as an inventory, my list, and look for all the books that we couldn't find. And after 3 months, if they're still not there, then I do go on and remove them from the computer. So then in 2020, as everybody else were weeding, I went through my nonfiction section and got rid of about 50% of it because, like you say, everybody's using their phones and a lot of the information was outdated. They just don't check out very much. We really needed this area for our children's display. So, and when I'm weeding, my goal is to have at least about 8 to 10 inches at the end of each shelf. And I also like to leave the bottom shelf completely empty so that I can display books so they look nice and get more checkouts. So I guess that's about it for me.
How do you decide what go? So I just flipped to your second picture here. So that's a good example of your 8 to 10 inches where you could pop a display item. How do you decide what you stick up on those displays?
Sometimes I put books that haven't been checking out and try to encourage people to save that book, I guess, to how I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if anyone attended the in-person session we did last year with a library space planning consultant who said, you would never go into a grocery store and buy a box of cereal based on the side of the box. Grocery stores, I mean, obviously the commercial enterprise tend to have more space, blah, 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 but you are seeing the front of that product that you want to buy almost every time. And our libraries are full of these beautiful pieces of art. These covers are amazing, and yet we store things sideways. It's like trying to choose cereal based on the side panel. So I love it when libraries can prioritize some front-facing displays. And we talked about that with the kids' books in the Clinton Library too. Ooh, Victoria says they pick by color, which I think is kind of a fun way to do it. Okay, let me stop my share. We did have one question that came through in the chat that I'll flip out to whomever um, before I go to the questions that we pre-selected. But who has a story, or how would you Marie kind of shared about this a little bit, but patrons seeing the amount that's coming out, how would you address those concerns?
So I've had to deal with this, which is why I was really happy that we did a good chunk of it while the patrons couldn't see what we were doing. But I explained the process of what weeding is and why it's called weeding and liken it to a garden. It's letting our garden grow. And we're not an archive. We have a very limited space. We've been trying to get an expansion for decades now, and we haven't gotten that expansion. So it's balancing that leisure seating with shelving of books because before we did have a lot of really tall stacks and it wasn't very welcoming. So just kind of explaining that balance that we have to keep and yeah, letting our garden grow. And I've also compared it to like a restaurant with a really, really big menu and how you can't choose because there's just so many options and it just it makes it better for the library. And usually most people go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But especially with Juve collections, like I've been trying to get rid of our Nancy Drew, but the Cirques are letting them stay on the shelves. Um, but yeah, there's just like there's a lot of like nostalgia and like love for certain titles that people do not want to see go, and sometimes it's their time.
Someone comments they took a leap and took out 20 titles in the middle of a John Sanford series. Say it ain't so. Jerry, I want to flip this question to you. We had this one in our sort of pre-list. What has been the patron and community response to weeding in general that you've seen?
I found that once the process is essentially complete and they can see how tidy everything has become, there's room to display books. They can pull books out of the shelf without risk of pulling everything off the shelf. It's been pretty positive, especially in the children's area. We instituted a lot of bins, like we had a ton of Fancy Nancy books or Dora books or whatever. So we did color-coded bins and put a little label on them. Those series that have multiple authors are always tricky for patrons to find. So we made it easier.
That's
I haven't
awesome.
really had a negative.
Um, Jerry is currently the director in Ventura to answer a question that came through chat, but has worked leading numerous other libraries as well. So, Marie or Kendra, you also had your names down to comment on that one. Marie, why don't you go next? In general, the community response.
Usually when they start looking to see what I've gotten rid of and really start looking at it, then they're okay with it. But I tell them we can't get new books if we don't have room on our shelves, and that usually they understand that.
Hmm. I think that's good. Kendra, anything that you wanted to say about that one?
Um, it's usually, yeah, you get a little bit of anger in the process, but then when people see the final results, um, they like it. So it's like, yeah, just kind of holding on and hoping that they understand.
I want to just share this picture really fast. I know we have someone from Des Moines here, but a testimony to the bins. Okay, so this is my kiddo. He was like 14 months when we took this picture. Of course, he was born right before COVID hit, and this was his first ever trip to the library. And he ran right into the Des Moines Public Library's bins where they have them all divided. And he found the things that go section all on his own. And that face is him figuring out that he knows exactly what books he wants to check out. So this is just like my little nod to bins and that method where it's like, oh, but it hurts my sensibilities to not have all the Fancy Nancy books, under their proper authors or whatever. But like, I don't know if Fancy Nancy is one that's written by multiple authors, but like, oh man, he just loves. We love the bin browsing, so I love to pull that picture out and say thank you to Des Moines for doing that because that's a fun one for sure. Very cool. Let's see. And if you guys have other questions, um, for the chat, and I know I owe somebody the big stats book link. So, um, Jerry, can you start us off with this question? Suggestions for someone just getting started. So you obviously tackled a humongous project in what you did, but what would your recommendations be to somebody getting started? And I'm going to pull up the big stats book and then we can talk about stats in a second.
I found it easiest to start with for myself was nonfiction because I'm not as invested in it. I worked as a children's librarian for 19 years. I love children's books. It's hard for me to part with them. Nonfiction was easy. So you need to find an area that you're not as attached to and just go for it and be ruthless. You can always replace it if you accidentally get rid of a book you should have kept. I don't recall ever having to repurchase a book that I've gotten rid of. You just have to be ruthless and do it.
There you go. Kendra, anything you want to say about getting started?
Just do it. Jump in. If it's good to kind of do some reading so you feel more validated. I don't think that ever hurts doing some of that research, looking at blogs. Like I was looking at school librarians' blogs, which, we're not a school library, but it was a children's section, so it made sense. Like, okay, what are kids used to seeing in their school libraries? How can I apply that? So just kind of doing some of that research, but really, yeah, you just gotta do it. Um, I also agree with Jerry on starting with nonfiction. It's a lot easier because you can base that on like facts, right? It's like you don't want these really old books that are teaching really incorrect. I unfortunately had to weed so many books about dinosaurs because we have so much new knowledge about dinosaurs, whether they had feathers, didn't have feathers, all of that. I don't want kids learning incorrect information about dinosaurs. So yeah, nonfiction's a good gateway.
Yeah, that's great. Um, here's a here's a question. Do you keep a running track of what you've eliminated so you don't just turn around and repurchase it?
No.
Wendy, I saw you shake your
No,
head right away.
I don't. And it has happened before where I've purchased something that I had previously weeded out. Um, but it's funny because it was a book, and I can't remember what the book was, but it was checked out. I had weeded it, it had been off the shelf for probably at least a year. I purchased it because someone requested, and I thought it's cheap, I'll just purchase it. And then it started getting checked out. So that case worked out. I don't think every case would be like that.
Yes, well, and you never know, that movie gets released and now we have that book talk that dredges up these old books that we were all ready to throw away and other things. Um, Here's an interesting recommendation from Sloan. Keep the bibliographic record on file and only delete the holdings record. That way we know which books we've gotten rid of. So it'd be easy enough to check if you think that sounds familiar. Why do I know that title? Um, oh no, here's a horror story from Harlan. I pulled a nonfiction book and a patron came in the same day looking for it. Like, what is she spying over your shoulder or something? Um, that's great. Let's see. I lost the thread of the chat here. Oh, I know. So you guys all just talked about starting with weeding the nonfiction. But here's a question in the chat. And maybe Marie, we can start with you with this one, because you had a fiction section up on your picture that you showed us. But any good resources for fiction or genre weeding? I have used Crew, but wonder if there's anything else you can recommend.
I don't use any special sources. I just pretty much go by our records and what's checked out. And sometimes it's really hard because sometimes it's a book that I loved 5 years ago and nobody else likes it, so it's got to go. And but I don't use any other resources. Just use our stats.
Hmm. And any other thoughts on that one, guys, weeding that fiction section? I know Wendy, you said you kind of just go in and start looking at what feels old, looks old, hasn't circed.
Yeah, I open every book and look at the last circ date and how many times between circulations, and it's more of a gut thing than anything else. Maybe I should use a system, but I don't.
The core collections is not a bad resource if you're worried about weeding a classic. And I guess that's a question I would throw to the group. What do you do with some of those classics? Do they circ enough to keep them, or is that something that you pull too? Kendra scrunched her nose.
Um, if I have to keep classics, especially with Newbery winners, I will see if it's had a reprinting, like a new cover,
Mm.
because sometimes it really is just icky looking, and it's like, if a kid will read it, a kid will read it. But sometimes just giving new life to those books. There's been a few times where we were gonna like weed some Harry Potter books, and it ended up just the dust jacket was really gross. So we just had our tech processing person replace that. We didn't even replace the actual book, just the plastic covering, and
Yeah,
it started going out again. So.
that's awesome. Yeah, that fresh cover goes a long way, doesn't it? I even had that with a kid's book. I think I checked out from a library recently. I thought, oh, wow, a nice new pretty edition of this. And then when I opened it up, it was like, oh no, that's the old book, but with a beautiful new cover. So that's very exciting. Um, Wendy, you said you don't necessarily have a schedule, but you think you would like one. What do you think that might look like for you?
I don't know really at this point. I know I should probably weed maybe a little bit every month or every couple months. I tend to do that with a lot of aspects in my life, though, is if I have a project, I just kind of go in and I just start doing it and go until it's finished. But that's not, like I said before, it's not very, it's time consuming. And so this is something I have to work on myself, I guess. I don't know. I'm not
Anyone
good with schedules.
anyone else want to comment on how you schedule? Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, we set up about every 3 years we go through each section, but that can be
Okay.
changed if we're having problems putting books away. If it's tight, I might even just do one shelving unit in that section, not even the whole section. But yeah, if you are getting too tight, then you're going to be weeded at our library.
So you would say like, okay, we're going to look at the J fiction, December of 2020 and again in 2023. Potentially you'd rotate your way through the whole library in those 3 years.
That's how we do it. Yeah, like I said, unless a
Except,
shelf is tight, and then yeah, I'll go over and pull the books that look bad and then check to see how many times they've been checked out. But I've often done just 2 or 3 shelves at a time.
yeah, yeah. Kendra, you guys have a move coming up. Good opportunity to weed, I imagine. Other schedules that you guys follow?
Um, with us currently doing a renovation, we haven't had access to our lower level because we've been waiting for concrete to be poured. So we've kind of gotten off of the schedule that we were even trying to first get started. But I think spring cleaning is a great start. Um, and yeah, and it's kind of those things as things come up with condition. And obviously, like kids' books get a lot more harder wear. So I'm like, how many times do I have to send this down to mending with a torn page before it's like, yeah, it's hit the end of its life cycle, time to go. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, we all sat down as like a leadership team and decided like when we were going to do certain sections, but we haven't been able to do it. So I think we'll have to re-examine that. Um, but it's definitely, I think I saw in the chat up a little bit about if you haven't weeded in a while, it's going to be painful. Um, and it's, yeah, so keeping it, and obviously each size library is going to be different. So we have a bigger budget, so we order more books. So we have to make room for those books more often.
absolutely. Um, I want to talk just a minute. Wendy, you said you weeded the cake pans. What else, like, how does that library of things weeding gone for you guys? I think that was something that came up in one of our earlier sessions on weeding. How do you decide what cake pans to weed? Is it that kind of same type of method, or do you have other thoughts on that?
Cake pans don't go out as much. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously they're cake pans. So I don't normally do a 3 to 4 year checkout on those. They don't take up as much space because I don't have as many. But a lot of the shaped pans, if it's an old shape, like I weeded a Barney pan, nobody's gonna make a Barney cake anymore. So that plays a part in that. Um, but if it hasn't been checked out, and which I probably go back to that 5 to 7 year, then I may pull it and say, okay, that's
Yeah,
not going out or it's irrelevant or things like that.
absolutely. Um, Jerry, I think I might flip this question to you since I think maybe this came up in your story. I think you said the group, the library that you weeded for had a lot of books for the size library that they were. So can we talk for a minute about sort of those statistics and how you found that out and maybe how you use did you use the big stats book from the state library
You know,
to make some of those determinations?
I didn't. The job was pretty overwhelming, and I had 3 weeks to do it um, because of the timing of shelves needing to be removed and the carpeting and all of that. Um, they're either an A or a B size library. It's a community of about 400 people, and they had about 12,500 books on their shelves, which is a lot of books. And they now have 8,300 books on their shelves. But I use the crew manual. If you've not ever weeded, that is a great resource just to read. It looks a little intimidating, but it's relatively easy reading, and it's got a great index, so it's easy to go back and find the pertinent data that you need. But I wasn't aware there were state statistics like how many books should be in a specific size library. So I'm kind of curious to look to see where I fit in that category.
Has anyone else leveraged that big stats book in their process or other statistics that they found helpful? Kendra's doing this. Yeah, so in that book, you can page through the statistics. It does have things like collection size, and you can obviously look for your size library and kind of see where you're at with that. It also talks about floor space. So if you are, if you want to compare to other libraries that are approximately the same floor space that you have, you could do that regardless of their size. Like we know some of our libraries in bigger towns are still in smaller old buildings. Kendra talked about working for decades to try and get a renovation, that sort of thing. So I put the link in the chat, but if you put in the search box on the State Library website, Big Stats Book, you'll find it as well. And that is a question that library directors answer on that annual survey every year. Okay, this is one that I would throw. Kendra said she wanted to answer this one. I'll throw this out to the chat as well. But when I was weeding, I did not survive without a podcast, an audiobook, a playlist. So Kendra said she's got some listening recommendations for us. So if you're a weeder in the chat, I want to hear too. What do you guys listen to while you weed?
So I don't know how many Dungeons and Dragons fans there are in the chat. During the COVID lockdown, I got into podcasts that were like real play, D&D. So I listened to Critical Role season 2. Um, if you like fantasy, if you like stories, you get really immersed. I had to listen to that with my wireless earbuds though, because they do swear sometimes. So if I have to have like my ears available when children are around and it's the children's department, honestly, I just rock it out to some Disney soundtracks. It's kid friendly. Usually they're pumping songs and keep me engaged. But
There you go. I have very vivid memories. When I managed a collection, we had to move into a basement. Like we were moving, it's a long story. It was a corporate collection. We were moving from a nice space into a basement space. And I started the Wheel of Time on audio and I moved that library and I inventoried that library and I weeded that library. And I will forever associate that project with Wheel of Time. A good one because they do a lot of walking. And so you can kind of tune out for a minute and they are still walking when you tune back in and you haven't really missed anything. Brittany plays relaxing spa music. I think that sounds nice. And obviously different if you're weeding during COVID. Wendy needs silence. That comment came through to the host and panelist, Wendy. But yes, Wendy, just quiet. You're so zen. I like this. You just get in it and you go. Um, what other questions? We've got about 10 minutes left here. I like the comments. We saw a couple comments come through that you feel like you just kind of need permission to do it. And I think that's a common theme we've heard from today. You take over a collection as the director or you get hired in to work on it. Um, and so that permission, that license to weed. Um, Other questions for the group as we get going through here? Oops, I see a couple of them at the top. How long do you keep books on the sales shelf before recycling them?
I still have books that I had left over from my big 2020 read. We're doing a book sale right now. And some of those books are from that weed in 2020. And I said, if they don't go this time, they're just disappearing because
Mm-hmm.
I just want them gone. Gone.
Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I can. I
Yeah, go ahead,
use
Marie.
I usually just get rid of a couple boxes every week, toss them out, starting with the ones that are in the worst condition. Is how I until we slowly get down to it looks a little better as you go along. But I get rid of like 2 boxes a week. Is how I do it.
You must have a perpetual sale then that is always out.
I try not to, but it happens
There
sometimes.
you go. Someone in the chat says 3 months is their reference point, so that's not bad. Um, Someone asked, and I think maybe Marie, you mentioned this as well, but um, a reference section. How have you guys maintained, if slash how have you maintained reference sections at all?
I don't have an actual reference section. We have the nonfiction, and it's
Yep.
got a few reference books in it, but not a lot.
Hmm. Jerry, does that tally with your experience as well?
Yes. And I'll be making my nonfiction section even smaller. That's the section I'm working on now. It's
Hmm.
easier to direct them to the internet and there's so many good websites out there, databases with current information.
Yes, and I think I might have shared this story in a previous webinar, but keeping a nice, healthy, well-weeded nonfiction section is very important. I think people still want a book on a topic. It's a nice, perhaps, gateway into a new topic for them, but so often, even with nonfiction, you end up referring them to the internet, and it's hard to keep some of that up to date. Um, we had a question come through. How do you weed a reference section with encyclopedias and music encyclopedia sets from the 90s? Is that kind of like the old answer, like one book at a time, one step at a time? Would you see a need to keep anything like that on the shelves?
We got rid of ours like
Hmm.
that. Pretty much my nonfiction section is mostly history because that's what my people do check out. And then I
Hmm.
have cookbooks and just a few other books. But we weeded ours down by space, what space we wanted to use it. So
Hmm.
going down till we got our space to what we wanted.
Yeah. Um, we talked a little bit about the Library of Things, but sort of related to that, audiobooks and sound recordings. Do you guys have criteria for how you weed those? Kendra, I saw you still had a pretty big J audio in one of your pictures anyway. You find yourself keeping a lot of those?
We actually weeded a, a good chunk. We also changed our system for our DVDs and our audiobooks, and our CDs. Before it was like a sleeve that was in like a little bin that they browsed and then brought the sleeve to us at the desk and we swapped them out. But since going away from that system, we're seeing people are checking out the audiobooks, the Juve audiobooks more, family
Hmm.
trips. But I think everyone's kind of facing this problem. Cars are getting rid of CD players. So if you buy a new car, you don't have a CD player anymore. So I'm actually kind of going more towards playaways and just upping our e-audiobook collection. And we're doing that for our adults here as well. But I follow that crew method, whatever it has for audio, and then obviously checking for scratches. Like if it's really scratched up, obviously it's not going to play. Um, yeah.
Yep, that's definitely a factor. Any other thoughts on weeding audio or other materials from the panel?
In Baxter, we got rid of all of our audiobooks a couple years ago.
Wow.
We just encouraged them to use Libby, but we just had a few commuters who were using them, and once they've heard them once, they didn't want to listen to them again. We just didn't think they were a good source or a good use of our funds. And so, yeah, so we don't have any audiobooks at this time.
I like that. And there's a suggestion in the chat I like. We got a Bluetooth CD player that could connect to a car. So if you had a patron that absolutely wanted to use that CD, you could also potentially circulate that extra tool. Um, well, we're coming down to the close of our time together. Any final words, anything from any of the panelists that you guys did not get a chance to talk about yet that you want to? I'll
I'd
chat
say,
it out. Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to say, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are afraid to do it, but just do it. Just get it done.
I think that's a common theme we've heard from each of you guys that there was a little spark that got it started and you just were able to go with it. And so I think that's great. And I would encourage everyone listening as well. So my thanks to our panelists for being with us today. Again, Kendra Evers from Clinton, Wendy Doyle from Woodbine, Jerry Delaney at Ventura, and Marie Van Beek in Baxter. So I know that you guys are very accessible. People can find you in the directory if they need you. But I think this was a great opportunity for us to hear how it's been going. So I hope everyone has enjoyed our series on weeding. You can check out the other three ones on our YouTube channel or in Iowa Learns as well. We did that weeding overview. We had a chance to talk about some specialized tools and spreadsheets and other resources that Becky Heil has found over the years. And Janae last week took us through the Weeding the Youth collections. And now we have this great panel here. So it's been a great fun, and I hope everyone is ready to weed, and I hope that the recycling plants of Iowa do not get too full as a result of this whole series. But I think you can see the thanks rolling through in the chat, and we're just really appreciative of your time today, folks. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.